Lee, it's so great to have this chance to talk to you today. I know you've been an advocate for women and particularly sexual assault survivors for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Susan. My road to being an advocate for survivors is a little unique. I spent the first 10 or so years of my career as a defense lawyer. I was a partner of one of the largest defense firms in the United States that represented some of the largest companies in the world, including pharmaceutical manufacturers. And so I represented those clients and I tried cases for those clients. And about 5 years ago, I was with my young daughters at the time and decided that it was time for me to switch roles and to be an advocate because I wanted my children to be proud of the work that I do. And we had come into contact with individuals who had been hurt badly in their lives, and I wanted to help them and their kids.
That's a wonderful story, and I can so relate. I have two daughters, as you know, and I have a granddaughter, and both of my daughters are in the business. So I think a lot of what we do is for our girls. Well, tell me a little bit about how you got into this particular case and what makes you so passionate about it.
For the last 5 or 6 years since I became a plaintiff's lawyer and an advocate for women in particular who have been injured, I've focused my practice on those who've been sexually abused. And I wish I could tell you that my phone doesn't ring all day long, but unfortunately it does. And what I've learned is that through word of mouth, women tell other women to call me, and they call me in their darkest day and when something has happened to them that they never thought was imaginable or happened to one of their loved ones. And unfortunately, this case is not unlike other cases that I've been involved in, where I got a phone call and heard that someone that I knew had been stalked as a result of an improper use of an Apple AirTag.
That is so shocking. I have so many Apple AirTags because I stick them in all my suitcases. And
And, and I
with
do the same, Susan. And I'll tell you that the hardest part to this case has been that after I got the first phone call, it seemed like everywhere I went, I heard stories of other women and other individuals and children that were being stalked or worse as a result of the use of Apple AirTags.
it's just unbelievable. I'm sure that you get so many calls and emails from women who have been hurt. And this is just adding more to that heap, right, of survivor stories. Let me ask you this, though, with the Apple AirTag stalking situation, how does someone know that they're being stalked?
That's a good question. Sadly, women and children often don't know that they're being stalked until it's too late. The Apple AirTag device is designed to give anyone who has a device, whether it's an Android or an Apple device, a notification that there is an unauthorized AirTag that is following them. That may be a notification on their phone, it may be a beep or another sound, but often those notifications don't come through, and so individuals don't know that they're actually being stalked or tracked by an individual who wishes to harm them.
Do you know how sometimes on my laptop, I'll go somewhere and I'll get a notice that there's another device trying to connect, and it tells me to, I don't know what the wording is, but it's something about, make sure that that device is one of my devices. Is Apple doing anything like that with these AirTags?
Apple claims that they should be warning users that there is an unauthorized AirTag that is following them. Sadly, the reality is that those warnings often don't work at all or delayed such that they don't provide the individual who's being tracked with appropriate notification to seek safety. And I think it's important right now for anyone who is listening to this conversation to know If you receive a notification that you are being tracked by an unauthorized AirTag, you should seek help immediately. You should not hesitate to call the police.
So you're suggesting call the police first thing. You don't go out and figure out, or is there even a way to figure out where it is and where it's coming from?
Well, one of my clients who was a client of mine because she unfortunately had a history of sexual abuse called me one day and said that she believed an ex-boyfriend was tracking her through an Apple AirTag that he had placed on her car. I thought foolishly that that was a figment of her imagination, or perhaps she was overly concerned. Thankfully, she didn't listen to me and she took her car to a mechanic. The mechanic was able to scan the vehicle and he found an AirTag. But what is horrifying is not only that that occurred in the first instance, but also that her mechanic looked at her and said, he does this routinely for women that come in and say they believe that their car has been tagged with an Apple AirTag and that someone is trying to follow them. It's a problem that's happening across the country, such that auto mechanics now offer it as a standard service to scan your vehicle for an unauthorized AirTag.
Wow, that is mind-blowing. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that kind of makes sense because if you're going to stalk somebody, you're probably going to put that device into a car, right? Or drop it into somebody's handbag, but a car probably makes more sense. Um, did Apple know this could be a problem? Is this something that they should have done something about, or is it something that in reality they're just now waking up to?
Apple knew from the very beginning. Not only were technology advocates and domestic violence advocates concerned about the original launch of the Apple AirTag, to date, there are tens of thousands of complaints that Apple has received related to AirTags being used for stalking purposes. And that's just what we know that is publicly available. We suspect that Apple had internal communications that made them aware of these types of dangerous activities, including child abduction and attempted abduction, many years ago, and did nothing to offer appropriate safeguards for its users.
Geez, honestly, up until about a year ago, I hadn't read anything about this being a problem. And you're right, in my own life, I'm hearing about it now. Maybe I'm just more aware of it, but certainly with all the advertising around the AirTags and the irony of it all is that it's really keeping your valuables safe, right? When you're traveling, you want it in your suitcase so you don't lose your jewelry and your dresses or whatever. But here you are putting your life maybe at risk because of this product. What if someone has an Android phone? Can you explain how that works? Would they still get a warning about an Apple AirTag?
That's an excellent question. Android users should be particularly concerned about the unauthorized use of AirTags, following them or tracking them. Unlike an Apple user, an Android user has to actually download a special app on their phone so that they can opt into receiving alerts that an AirTag is following them. That app is often standard in most Apple devices. It isn't for Android users. Knowing that almost 40% of users in the United States that have cellular devices are using Androids, it's unconscionable to think that Apple did not have heightened protections for those users to make sure that they automatically received timely notifications that an unauthorized AirTag was following them.
Wow. So if I have an Android phone and I'm not in this line of work or in police work or something, how am I supposed to get this information?
That's an excellent question too. If you aren't in law enforcement, if you aren't in an advocacy group, the only way that you know about these types of lawsuits is if you seek legal representation. You need to have a consult with someone who has handled these cases before and can give you advice about how best to proceed.
It's just stunning what happens. Um, now, I could be wrong about this, but I think that Apple recently implemented some new safety procedures related to the AirTags. Is that correct?
They did, and sadly, those new measures were too little too late. By this point, we know that there had already been tens of thousands of stalking incidents throughout the United States. And even these measures that have been recently released still fall far short of what any consumer should expect. Nobody wants to wake up and find out that they are being stalked or that a loved one is being stalked, much less that a child is being stalked.
And what are you seeing in your own practice in terms of women, and I'm assuming this is mostly women, and children being stalked? I imagine sometimes it goes farther than being stalked. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Sadly, once someone is being stalked, it gives the perpetrator, the abuser, the ability to pick the time and efforts of their abuse. They have the upper hand, and women are completely unaware that on the drive home from work, on the way to pick up a child from school, they're being stalked by someone unknowingly who has the motive and the opportunity to abuse them, if not hurt them worse. I think that the other case that should haunt all of us, parents, grandparents, anyone who has children in their life, is the idea that it's easy to slip one of these AirTags into a backpack.
Hmm.
It's easy to put this on a child undetected. And while many parents may joke about the idea of chipping our children so that we know where they are at all times, the reality, the horrifying reality, is the idea that someone else could track your child without your knowledge.
And have you seen cases like this in your practice? Do you know of cases where a perpetrator has tracked a child, and I assume they're trying to kidnap that child? Is that what happens?
There have been several reported cases, particularly in difficult custodial situations where parents are at loggerheads over who should have a child when, and the Apple device can be used to improperly obtain that child's location and abduct, if not attempt an abduction of the child. And that's why children advocacy groups have been coming out and sounding the alarm bell as it relates to these devices from the very inception that they went to market in 2021.
Just stunning. What advice do you have for women who may be hearing about this issue for the first time and never even thought to think about it? Now, these are women who haven't been stalked, hopefully, but what do you do to protect yourself?
Well, first things first, if you're an Android user, immediately download the app that allows you to know if a Apple device is following you without your consent. If you are a woman who has been stalked, it's important that you seek legal advice from a lawyer who understands this type of litigation and can give you advice about how best to proceed. I think it's also important that women know they aren't alone, that children know they aren't alone. The fear and the anxiety that comes with stalking and abuse and abduction, it's a lifetime injury. And the only way that we can prevent it from happening to another child or another person is if you come forward and you take a stand.
So Lee, I think a lot of women who are watching this are going to be completely blown away that this is even an issue. And hopefully they haven't been stalked or had a bad experience. What advice do you have for women just to better protect themselves?
For women to best protect themselves, first things first, if you have an Android device, stop what you're doing right now and download the Apple Tracker app and put it on your phone so that you have a chance of receiving those notifications. If you don't have an Android device, look at your phone, look at the settings, and review any notifications that you have received. Make sure that you are aware you aren't sharing your data with another device unknowingly.
I'm guessing, Lee, that in this case, just like in the rideshare and Roblox and other sexual assault cases that you and I both worked on, A lot of women feel shame and guilt and think they're the only ones this has ever happened to, and they should have been smarter. Can you say a word or two to women who might be feeling that way?
The most important thing that I tell my clients is that they are not alone. Sadly, it's rare that a woman comes to me and tells me a story that I haven't heard before from another client, from another friend. Women who are experiencing distress and fear and anxiety, depression related to being stalked, related to abuse from the Apple AirTags, it's not unique. What I hear from my clients most often is that at the end of the day, they want justice. They want to hold those accountable that harmed them. And it's not just because they want it for themselves, it's because they want to prevent it from ever happening to another woman. And they are willing to be safe and come forward and share their thoughts with me or other attorneys because they want to make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to their sister or to their daughter.
Such a powerful motivator, taking care of other women. Um, are there lawsuits already about this? I know there's a little bit in the news. Can you fill us in about what might be going on?
There have already been some lawsuits related to the Apple AirTags in California. Those were class action lawsuits, and ultimately there was a decision that these types of cases need to move in a different vehicle through the legal system because the injuries that women face and I shouldn't just say women, but women and men and children face when it comes to domestic violence and sexual abuse, those injuries are very specific to the person who experienced the abuse. No two people experience abuse in the same way. And
Mhm.
so the lawsuits that are being filed now and will be filed in the future are women and men and children who are banding together to tell their stories individually, but in one court in what's called mass tort litigation.
And is this a good thing for survivors? That it's not a class action?
I always tell my clients that there's safety in numbers. So when multiple people come forward and they share their individual stories of abuse, and you hear that there are connections between each of those individuals as it relates to an unauthorized AirTag tracking them without the proper notifications, there's a strength in knowing that you aren't alone, and there's a strength in knowing that you can show the company that you're willing to stand up and say, it didn't just happen to me, it happened to other people too, and we demand better.
And do we have any idea how common this is, the use of AirTag for stalking people?
I think we don't really know exactly how common it is that the AirTags are being used to stalk or otherwise abduct people. So far, the evidence is still preliminary, but it seems like everywhere I go, I'm hearing a story of someone's daughter in college, a client of mine, someone's child. They're becoming so evident every day that it feels like every time I turn around, I'm hearing a new story about an Apple AirTag that was used improperly to track someone.
It's unbelievable. Okay, Lee, I'm sure that there are women out there listening now who have experienced the stalking and worse as a result of these Apple AirTags. But they may be thinking to themselves, I've already gone through this. I don't want to put myself through more, so why should I file a lawsuit?
When clients come to me after they or a loved one have been abused, the first question is often, why should I go through this process? That can happen when the abuser is still facing criminal charges, when the individual is still on the street, and perhaps even when people didn't believe my client. The answer is that the only way we are ever going to seek accountability and the only way that there's ever going to be change is if we use the civil justice system to file lawsuits and hold those accountable that should have known better. The Meadow Law Firm where I work is proud to stand with survivors, and we are proud to be the ones that initiate and fight for change because this shouldn't happen to anyone. I tell clients many times that when they come forward, they don't just protect themselves, they protect their mothers and their daughters and their children. And that's something that we can all be proud of.
Um, so Lee, I know you've been an advocate for women for some time. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and also how this became such a passion project for you?
Um, Prior to my current role as an advocate for sexual abuse survivors, I spent many years of my career as a lawyer representing some of the largest companies in the country. I was a partner at a major law firm and I defended pharmaceutical companies, auto manufacturers in their various high-scale litigation, what's known as bet the company litigation. Shortly after I had my second daughter, I was walking through their preschool and I was dressed in a suit and I was prepared to go to court to advocate on behalf of one of my corporate clients. And I heard my 4-year-old turn around and say proudly to one of her friends that I was a helper. And that's why mommy goes to court every day. In that moment, I knew that I had to change what I was doing with my life and that there was a greater and higher purpose for my skill set. And so shortly thereafter, I left my defense firm. I fired all of my clients. And I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my career advocating for and fighting on behalf of sexual abuse survivors.
I love that. And that's what makes you so special. Now, what about Apple AirTags? That's a relatively new area. How did you become interested in it?
The Apple AirTag case first came to me through one of my clients who was a survivor of sexual abuse, who was a mother of a young child. She was 23 at the time, and she called me to tell me that she had a former boyfriend that she believed was stalking her. I admittedly had never heard of Apple AirTags being used for this purpose, but she told me that she took her vehicle to her local mechanic and had it scanned and discovered that there was an Apple AirTag that her former boyfriend had put on her car and he was using to stalk her and her 3-year-old child.
That is stunning. Uh, is this just a once in a million kind of a situation, or is this happening to a lot of women and families?
Susan, I wish that the unauthorized use of AirTags was only happening to my client and not to others. But sadly, we now have learned that Apple was aware of tens of thousands of stalking complaints between 2021 and present. In just a handful of years, they received over 40,000 complaints related to AirTags being used to stalk people. My client wasn't alone. The real truth is that we'll never know how many individuals have been the subject of this type of stalking and much worse.
That's an unbelievable number. That shocks me even listening to it now. So, if there were that many complaints to Apple, they surely knew something was going on. Is it a problem that they just can't do anything about it, or do they not want to do anything about it?
Apple made a decision not to do anything about the countless claims that they were receiving that indicated time and time again that the Apple AirTag device could be used to harm someone, to stalk someone, to sexually abuse someone in a sensitive moment. Rather than employ appropriate warnings and also to employ warnings that would be received instantaneously, not hours or days later, Apple ignored basic safety protocols. We know now that many of these women received notifications hours to days later when it was too late. The key to this litigation, the key to this problem, is that Apple knew better. They knew that they were creating a device that could be used to stalk and to sexually abuse and to intimidate others. And rather than take every person, Apple knew that they had created a device that could be used to stalk and create fear and scare individuals. And rather than take every safety precaution, they ignored these warnings. And they knew that their device was not providing the appropriate warnings that individuals needed to get the help that they so desperately deserved.
I'm sure there are a lot of women watching right now who are learning of this potential issue for the first time. So, what would you say to them? What do you do to protect yourself? How do you know that somebody hasn't planted an AirTag in your handbag or in your kid's backpack or something?
So, the most important thing that you need to do to protect yourself from an unauthorized AirTag is first things first. If you are one of the 40% of Android users in the United States, stop what you're doing right now and immediately download the Apple Tracker app. That way, you should receive notifications that an unauthorized AirTag is following you. Without that app, you will have no way of knowing that someone is following you. If you already have an Apple device, take it out right now. Look through the settings to determine who is following you. Have you authorized any Apple tags to follow you? Here's the key. If you get a warning that an unauthorized AirTag is following you, you need to immediately alert the authorities, whether it's the police, your school security, your place of employment. Do not hesitate to seek the help that you need.
This is mind-boggling to know how this could be happening, and yet so many people could be unaware of it. Uh, So I want to go back to something you just said. You're telling me that 40% of the market is Android users. And unless you've thought about this and are educated and downloaded an app, you would be totally unaware. You have no way of even knowing if somebody was trying to stalk you through one of these devices.
That's correct. Android users were actually at the greatest risk of harm because Android users weren't made aware that they had to download a standalone app so that they could opt into receiving notifications from an unauthorized AirTag. Android users were essentially left without any protections. I can't tell you how many clients I've spoken to who didn't know, or their adult children didn't know, their college daughters didn't know that they needed to get this protection. They had no idea.
That's mind-blowing. Now, you mentioned college daughters. Is this a problem on campus?
My fear from other lawyers that I've spoken to, from clients that come to me, is that it's the young population, those between the ages of 16 and 24, who are at the greatest risk because they're carrying their phones with them everywhere they go, but they receive so many notifications. They receive so many text messages from friends, DMs, that when they see something that says unauthorized AirTag use, they just ignore it. They haven't been trained, they aren't aware of the ramifications and the extreme danger they could be in.
And have there been cases or lawsuits filed on behalf of college age students who have been stalked?
I'm aware of several instances in which the police have been notified that college age girls are receiving these types of notifications. And by the time they alert their campus police, something bad has already happened.
So let's go to the mind of this creep who's using these Apple AirTags to stalk someone. What's the ultimate goal for that person?
The ultimate goal for any abuser is to prey on the vulnerable, to exploit someone who is trusting. The strategic advantage that a perpetrator has in these cases is that they can track your every movement throughout the day. And often they can track for days or weeks at a time to find their moment of opportunity to commit a crime, to abuse someone, to attempt to abduct a child. They have moment by moment tracking through the Apple AirTag to know where the victim that they are targeting is located on a moment to moment basis.
You've also mentioned backpacks. Can you talk a little bit more about children being vulnerable?
Judges will tell you that they are seeing an uptick in the number of cases in which Apple AirTags are being used to track children, often in situations where there is a custodial arrangement that's in dispute, where
Mm.
parents are fighting over a child, and then they're able to use the Apple AirTag to track their child improperly. We also know that Apple AirTags are being used to track children unknowingly, not just their parents, but also other perpetrators. Perpetrators who can put or drop an AirTag in a bag and watch a child's every movement through a gymnastics competition and wait for their moment of opportunity.
This is scary stuff. Um, so, Lee, this is a pretty new product and this is a very new topic. Are there already lawsuits about this?
Yes, women have already come forward and filed lawsuits against Apple related to the unauthorized use of AirTags, used to stalk them, to intimidate them, to instill fear in women. We know that these lawsuits have been filed in California and now throughout the United States, and we expect that they'll continue to be filed on a daily basis. My law firm, the Meadow Firm, is proud to represent the women who are courageous enough to take a stand against Apple and hold them accountable because this should have never happened to them and it shouldn't happen to anyone else either.